in my opinions, is one of the overall issues of frameworks. And I believe your audience is primarily PHP based. Is that correct?
PHP, Python. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yep. Yeah. So PHP, Python, JavaScript. I'll throw that into it as well. Mm-hmm. The double-edged sword of a framework is that it abstracts all that theory away from you. And so it really just focuses on the execution. And so when I was mentoring people when I was back in Nashville, I remember I was mentoring this young developer, and she was like, what project should I work on? And I was like, well, what you need to do, something I recommended she would do, is like, you should write a URL shortener in plain PHP.
Right.
No frameworks. Because if you do that, URL shortener, really simple concept, but you learn hashing, you learn dependency injection, you learn like class structures. It's like you learn the object oriented, you learn the data model manipulation, you have to store it in a database. It's like that simple project there would teach you the whole gamut of a typical web application theory.
Yes, definitely. I get bugged all the time about, when are you going to do a framework tutorial and a course on the latest and greatest. But the thing is, from a trainer's point of view, is these things change a lot all the time, and you've got to keep the versions updated. And you do get the feeling that you are teaching through the eyes of the framework. So I try and do courses that are very sort of beginner friendly, basic courses that teach the fundamentals of certain particular programming topics. And then I try and use those to then build examples upon. And I do appreciate that it's not the buzziest thing. It's not the hypiest thing, right? If I did the same example in, say, Laravel or Symfony, then that would probably attract more people to the channel. Whereas teaching the raw fundamentals of writing that and actually solving that, because like you mentioned, the URL shortener, there's so much to it. There's so much involved in that, and that in itself is several courses, because you have to teach hashing, like you said, you have to teach dependency injection, object orientation. So before you even talk about URL shorteners, you have to take all of those baby steps first. I mean, I've done talks before where I was talking about, learning through a framework or learning through the raw fundamentals. It's slightly controversial because there is so many developers who just want the quick fix. They just want the thing working there, and in my opinion, they kind of feel like they don't need to worry about all of the low level stuff that the framework would deal with. But if they have that sort of attitude, then they're opening themselves up to a lot of risk. And you just have to look at some of the things that happen in JavaScript to see, with the node modules stuff, where one library or framework changes and something happens, and before you know it, your dependencies are a mess and you've got to work all that through. Yeah, it is a topic that I am very passionate about, I think, in terms, learning the fundamentals first is so important.
Yeah, and I think as you look at this industry is so young, right?
Yeah, it is.
And it's going to continue to grow, and you're going to see a divergence in the skill set. I mean, you can equate this to other trade crafts industries, and you'll realize that at a certain point, there's a split between people who execute using a set of tools, and then there are people who build tools, right? And a lot of the problems in technology that you scale when you get to that you solve when you get to scale are about building tools and understanding how those tools really interact with each other. It's not a blueprint. I appreciate your channel for focusing on that, because I think there's a point in which it totally makes sense to understand how to do it in a framework. But at a certain point, like you're going to limit your growth.
Yes.
And if my career is one thing, it's like constantly about identifying where that next growth area is and trying to get there. And for developers who are happy with just, going in and using the framework, that's great. I'm not dogging them. That's completely awesome. And there's a great position for that. But for developers who are really passionate about knowing and about growing, you have to really dive into that theory.
Definitely. I do think that there is, say in the future, well, not even like late in the future, but with things like PWAs and all of those sort of minifying your application to make it performant and scalable. I've had so many conversations recently where people have been dropping frameworks because they've needed to achieve these scalable and performant goals, and they were just like, these frameworks, I'll pick on jQuery for example, they don't allow you to have that sort of finite control of the JavaScript because it's not raw JavaScript. Plus, you have an overhead that you have to deal with and dependencies. And because you are adding all of these libraries, your attack surface becomes much broader. And so it's a convenient factor right away. Right. So using a framework is very convenient because everything is sort of, well, a lot of stuff is done for you. But then you're lumbered with this thing that you have to sort of, parcel up every time you do a deployment, and you have to monitor it. And when you do an update, and you get all these updates coming through, you don't have time to go through all that code and have a look and see what's actually going on under the hood. So you don't actually know what's going on in your application. And that is actually quite a scary thought when you are a huge company. Yeah.
Yep. They spend lots of money trying to solve that problem. How do you bring that stuff in because of the convenience and just the speed? And sometimes they're just good frameworks, and you want to do that.
Yeah.
But when I was at the startup again, you hear people dogging PHP for scalability and whatnot, and we, with that philosophy, with the understanding of like, we need to be conscious of the overhead in which we're introducing to the application, because in primary ticket sales, you have to scale quickly. Sure. It's burst traffic.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you sell 15,000 tickets in a matter of 5 minutes, it's a huge amount of traffic. You have to put on the loader. You have to put on the system. And so, with that in mind, we built a very thin PHP application that we ran into trouble with the amount of database connections before we ran into problems with the PHP application. And when we were doing that, the comparison was, I think, a standard Symfony application at the time, in order to handle the requests, was around 15, 17 instantiations of classes.
Right.
In order to do it. And every time you instantiate a class, that's overhead.
Yes.
Overhead adds up. And then when we were doing ours, I think we were at 5 to 7 classes of instantiation. And we pulled in a framework that would help. At the time we were using the Aura framework, which you could bring in little big pieces here and there. And so on the bigger stuff that we didn't want to actually rewrite, like dependency injection, just pulled in a small little Aura, the helper, and then wrote all this glue stuff around it. And yeah, like I said, it allowed us to scale beyond our database,
the limitations that you were having.